Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'm Leslie Lee, a member of the Fedwire Fund Service ISO 20022 business team, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Thank you for joining us for the MyStandards Resources, Tools, and Testing webinar. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Federal Reserve Financial Services webinar site. Before we get started, let me share a quick reminders and some logistics for today's session. If you're having difficulty with your audio, you can switch the audio option from the audio and video menu at the top of your screen. Please note for today's session, you can submit your questions using the Q&A feature on the bottom right of your screen. We will try to answer as many questions during the session, but if we don't get to your question, we will be addressing them on our FAQ page in the Fedwire ISO Implementation Center on frbservices.org. And just as a reminder, if you don't have the WebEx application, you can utilize Google Chrome or Firefox as the preferred browser. Again, this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available on our Federal Reserve Financial Services webinar site. With that, let me turn it over to Frank to kick off the session. Frank, I think you're on mute.
Perfect start. Thank you, Leslie, and welcome back, everyone. Last time, Gina and I set the scene for our series of educational webinars that we will be offering in 2023 as part of your preparation to implement ISO 2022 for the Fedwire Fund Service. Today, we are trying to set you up for success by introducing you to the tools and resources and testing opportunities that we will be rolling out in the months to come. Let's have a look at the agenda for today's session. So first of all, we're going to discuss a little bit or talk a little bit about the MyStandards platform. And we're going to start with one of the first barriers to accessing the platform is actually to obtain your credentials. Many of you in the past have had some kind of issues with onboarding and getting those credentials, so we thought it worthwhile to start off the session and taking you through each step of the obtaining credentials process, which is pretty much a 5-step process, short and sweet. Then we'll have a look on how you can actually, once you have your credentials, how you can access the Fedwire Fund Service resources. So the MyStandards landing page for the Fedwire Fund Service. We will show what resources are available today, and we will show the platform features. And time permitting, we will actually do a live demo. We do have slides for everything because Murphy is always around the corner. So just to make sure that if there would be bandwidth issues, that we can show what the platform offers, but I will give it a try anyway to show you with a live demo what you will be able to use on the MyStandards platform. After the MyStandards platform, we will move to the next topic, which is the MyStandards Readiness portal, which is actually built on top of the MyStandards platform, and that we will be enabling for all your initial testing and getting ready for ISO 2022 sent across the Fedwire Fund Service. Again, we will show you the features, what that MyStandards Readiness portal offers, and we will show you with some screenshots here because this is not yet available as such, and we will announce the date. And then finally, we will tell you something about test scripts and the attestation forms that will be made available also on the MyStandards platform. And obviously, as indicated by Leslie, we will stop after each section to see whether you have raised any questions, and we will try to address as many as possible during this session. Okay, let's have a look at the first barrier to starting your MyStandards experience, and it's obtaining your credentials. Tackling this first hurdle is not that complicated, as we will show in the next couple of slides. So there's 8 slides to take you through this, and what I've done in preparation of this webinar is actually I have registered my son to get MyStandards credentials. I doubt, given he's 12, that he's interested in ISO 2022 yet, but I've used a real person, not a Fed employee, with different profile, obviously, to show you how easy it is to actually access the MyStandards platform. First of all, you have to go to swift.com. MyStandards Platform is a tool that is offered by Swift as vendors. So you need to access it from the swift.com MyStandards link that you see on screen. And when you go to that website, you will see the page that I'm showing now with this brand new Swift branding and colors since the beginning of this year. As you go to the MyStandards landing page, I would say the platform, the slide I'm showing here, very important, I think, is that this offers a lot of tutorials to help you with your MyStandards experience. So there's a lot of videos available telling you how to use the platform, what features are available, and how to make most of these features. So I would advise anyone, if you're new to MyStandards, to have a look at these tutorials because they might help you with your onboarding experience of using ISO 2022 for the Fedwire Funds service. But today, we are looking at the logon process. So before you can actually log on to MyStandards, you need to get those credentials. And what I'm going to explain in the next couple of slides, we've actually also documented this in a short how-to, a PDF that is in the process of being made available on our ISO 2022 Implementation Center. So there's a short PDF, I think it's 4 pages, that will take you through the different steps to obtain your MyStandards credentials. So feel free to download it and share it with your colleagues that maybe are not attending today's webinar as they are in search on how to obtain these MyStandards credentials. Now we are going to take you in this webinar through the different steps of that process. And first thing you do as you log on or you click on that log on button, is it's going to take you to this screen. So if you already have Swift.com credentials or MyStandards credentials, you can perfectly well reuse these. There's nothing special needed for the Fedwire Fund or the Federal Reserve Services MyStandards offering. You can reuse the credentials you already have in place. So that would be the left side of the slide where you log on with your email and your password. Now we're going to look at the case where you do not have an account yet and where you're going to create one. So you click the Create button, and you're going to be asked to register as a user. So on the left side, you see there all the information you will be required to fill out. And you see I filled it out for my son, Ben, hiding his telephone number or email addresses because we don't want him to get any of your support questions, obviously. But you see there that it's a pretty straightforward registration form, name, a telephone number, an email address. You create a password to log on to the MyStandards platform. On the bottom, you can indicate whether or not you're interested in getting information on Swift products and services, which for my son I have not enabled. And then there's a challenge on the bottom, and the last thing you need to do is click the Submit button. So pretty short and easy: name, address, mobile number, email address, a password, and you're good to go. Now, when you click the Submit button, you're going to be taken to the next page, which is basically saying that they have received your request to create a Swift.com account and that an email has been sent to the address that you filled in as part of your user registration, and you need to confirm by clicking the link in the email, that registration process or your registration request. So here a screenshot of what my son received. You will see there that he got this email from Swift.com, and he's now expected to click this link to continue with the creation of his credentials to log on to Swift.com and to the MyStandards website. As you click that link, you will now get the information that your account creation is confirmed. So Ben now has the account. The only thing you need to do is accept terms and references of MyStandards and click the Confirm button. On clicking that button, you will see that your email is now confirmed, and you can now actually start using or exploring the MyStandards platform. So you'll see a couple of options on the bottom of the bottom right of the slide that you can do. You can, if you are connected to Swift, you can link this account to your institution. You can further detail your profile. So many of the options you can follow up on, but we're interested in actually exploring My Standards today. So we're going to click the Explore My Standards button, and it takes you to the very first page that we showed initially. So it takes you to that swift.com/mystandards landing page, and now we're actually going to log in because now we do have an email address and password. We have the credentials to access this platform. However, we're not there yet, because as you click that button and you fill in your email address and password, you're going to be asked to set up your two-factor authentication. So a further step as part of an increased security of the system is that you will be asked to define how you want to enable the two-step or two-factor authentication. And as you see on the slide, there's a couple of options. You can provide your mobile number, you can provide your email address, and for my son, I just enabled the option of send me an email every time I log in for my two-factor authentication. As a piece of advice for you as you register for yourself, the mobile number is the easiest one because within a fraction of a second, you get that code on your mobile and you don't have to start accessing your email account to get that code. But for this purposes, I found it easier to use my son's email account. So we enable the two-factor authentication by email, and as we close that window, I'm not going to be asked to provide the code that was sent to my son's email address, which you see there on screen. I click OK, and we are in. So that is it. Very straightforward in 8 slides. You register as a user, you click on the link, you set up your two-factor authentication, and you're ready to go. You log on into the MyStandards platform. With that, I'm going to check in with Leslie. I know we have just started, but I'm sure this might already have triggered some questions from the audience. So Leslie, before I move to accessing the Fedwire funds pages on MyStandards, did you get any questions?
Yes, Frank, we have some questions. Here's the first one. We do not have a Swift connection. How do I get access to the platform and the specs?
Okay, so great question. And as many times, you do not need a Swift connection. So you do not need to use Swift as a network service provider, messaging provider. The only thing you need is an email address. And as you've seen, I use my son's Gmail address. You just need an email address to register. So there's no need to be a Swift client. This is a standalone product that Swift offers, for which the Federal Reserve System has bought a license. And you do not need to be connected to Swift for messaging or for their network services. So no need to have a Swift connection, no need to have the BIC or Swift code.
Thank you. We have another question. Can we reuse logon credentials among colleagues?
Absolutely, and we actually know that in many organizations they do so, where they create a profile for the team that is responsible for testing and onboarding with ISO 2022. You can absolutely reuse a generic email address for the team, and as one of the advantages that you will be able to see each other's test activity too. So if, for example, you would work in shifts or different colleagues work at different times, you would actually be able to follow up and check what your colleague has been testing, and then you can pick it up where they have left off. So yes, you can use a generic logon credentials for MyStandards.
Good to know. Thank you. We have one more. Will I be able to see the implementation details of all those groups that you showed?
That depends. So let me just take that slide again. So you see here, when you're in and you look at all the groups, this is just a screenshot, by the way. There's hundreds of groups that have published their specifications on MyStandards. It depends on whether all these organizations have shared their implementation guidance, implementation guidelines publicly, because you do not have to share them publicly. You can also set them to private. So the Fedwire fund specifications, as much as the FedNow service specifications, have been shared publicly, so everyone has access to those groups up to registration with the platform. But many of these specifications are considered private. So if you do not have access to one of these group certifications, you might actually request access, but it could very well be that if they think you have no reason to access their detailed specifications, that you will not be accepted as someone with access. So some of these groups, many of those groups have public specifications that you can access, but at the same time, many of those groups are also set up with a private profile where it depends on whether you're a participant in their system to whether or not you will have access to their certification.
Thank you. So we have one more. Can you explain how to make your mobile the default for your second level authentication?
Yes, so it's just clicking on, let me go back now. I know it's a screenshot because we didn't want to set this up live, but you can actually just enable your mobile. So you can see here, if you see my screen, verification codes will be sent as text messages to your mobile phone. You disable the email address and enable the mobile phone. And if you only put that option, then you will get those text messages delivered to your phone. Okay, now we click back.
Okay. One more. Can you help me to navigate once you log into MyStandards portal? Say you want to get to the Fedwire Funds group page. How do I do that?
That's the next section of today. So unless there's more questions, I suggest we show that live on how you, once you have your credentials, can now get access to the Fedwire Funds specification.
Perfect.
Okay. Good. So how do you get access to the Fedwire Funds MyStandards pages? I showed you this group or an overview of some of the groups, and it's 4 easy steps, as you see, another 4 slides. Again, this is Slideware. I've taken screenshots because my son is now part of that group, and of course, I don't want to remove him to show it live. But this is very straightforward, as you will see. So as you go to this page, you log into MyStandards and you look at all the groups, fill in Fedwire, and you will see that the groups disappear as you type in the letters. You will actually be brought to the Federal Reserve Financial Services landing page. So as we put in Fedwire, we are brought to that single group. Luckily, that's the only one that mentioned Fedwire. Otherwise, we might have an issue. So as you search for FedNow or for FedNow, for what it's worth, you will be brought to the Federal Reserve Financial Services landing page. And as you click on that button, you're now taken to the Federal Reserve Financial Services, and this is an important distinction, landing page. So you get some generic information about the FRFS, but you will see there that there's no guidelines from an FRFS point of view. There's no open communities. You need to focus on the subgroups that we have created. As systems that we operate or will operate in case of FedNow are implementing ISO 2022, we create subgroups to document the specifications for FedNow and Fedwire funds today. If in the future we would have different systems that migrate to ISO 2022, we could create more subgroups to document the implementation guidance for use of ISO 2022 for those systems. But today you will find there, when you go to the Federal Reserve Financial Services page, you will find 2 subgroups. And for today's purposes, we're going to be clicking on the Fedwire Funds subgroup. As you click on the Fedwire Funds subgroup, you are now brought to the Fedwire Funds Service landing page. Again, some generic information about the Fedwire Funds service, kind of like an introduction. I will show you in the live demo later on that you can actually hide this. But what we're interested in is that on the bottom you see that we do not have access to any usage guidelines yet, as I show on my screen, but there is an open community, and that is the next step. So you look for the group, you access Fedwire Funds, and now you're going to request access. You're going to click that button, and this is where it becomes, for some reason, difficult because they made it too easy. And I mentioned that also in the introduction webinar. As you click request access, you are a member because we've shared our specifications publicly. So there is no need for further steps. Access is granted automatically on clicking that request access button. But what we've learned is that you should refresh your screen. So you see here that as you click the button, this changes to member. As you refresh your screen, you're going to see that those usage guidelines are now available for you to study or browse or whatever you want to do with them. So look for the Fedwire, the Federal Reserve or Fedwire group. Take the subgroup Fedwire Funds or FedNow if you're interested in FedNow. Request access, refresh your screen, and you will see these usage guidelines appear on screen. So I hope with that, Leslie, that I answered the person's question on how you actually can get access to the Fedwire Funds specifications on the Federal Reserve Financial Services landing page. And again, you had some questions, so just to break it up a little, make it interactive. Did you get any more questions in the meantime?
Yes, we did get some questions. Here's the first one. I requested access and I do not seem to have received a confirmation. Do you have any ideas
Okay. So in general, as you've just seen, access is granted automatically on clicking that request button. So you do not need to receive a confirmation email that you have been granted. However, I mean, one thing, whenever we make changes, you will be informed on the email address you registered with when we post something new, when we have made changes, when samples have been added to the portal that you have access to. So you don't need the confirmation you're in. By clicking the button and refreshing your screen, you have access automatically. So there's not like the registration where you have a link that needs to be clicked to get access. No, it's automatically. You click that request access button and you're a member of the Fedwire Fund Service MyStandards pages.
Okay, great. Here's another question. I do not see the request access button.
Then you should already have access.
Okay.
Now, let me clarify. Just want to make sure that the person asking this question, because you might be trying this live, make sure you're in the Fedwire Funds Service community, not in the Federal Reserve Financial Services, because there is no such community at that level. You need to go to the FedNow or Fedwire Funds. So I just want to make sure that could be why the person does not see the request access button. Otherwise, you should be that grade. You should see that grayed out member, which meaning you're already in, basically. So make sure you're clicking on the subgroup Fedwire Funds Service, and then you should see that request access button.
That's probably what's happening. Thank you. Here's another one. I do not seem to get past the dual verification setup. Do you have any guidance?
This is a recurring issue. This is a question we get rather often, actually, as it often relates to the security settings of your organization. What I would suggest is to check, first of all, your spam folders, because that email to click on or might end up in your spam folder. But if that does not work, what I've suggested and where we managed to solve issues in the past is maybe use a private PC to set up your account, or you could enable a different option for the dual verification. If you use email and the emails are not coming through, maybe try the text message as setting up or for your dual verification. Now, if the problem persists, however, I mean, anytime this has been raised, we managed to solve it by either going on a private PC or changing the way of enabling the dual verification. But if it would persist, then there is the way to request Swift support as solution provider. But as mentioned, for all the cases I've seen so far, it was sufficient to move to a different PC, maybe with less strict security settings on the private front compared to the organization you work for. And we always managed to get people set up and get past that initial step.
Okay, one more question. Where can I find the MyStandards PDF document, the login instruction PDF document? It looks like currently we only show, yeah, go ahead.
So the login, we have created the how-to. I would refer to you, Leslie, to see when it is actually going to be made available on our Fedwire Funds ISO 2022 Implementation Center. It is in the course of this week, right? So the how-to should be available in our Implementation Center soon, if not available yet.
That's correct. It will be on our Implementation Center. We currently have a one-pager, but we're going to replace it with a 4-page, more detailed instructions.
We fine-tune it as we get questions from customers. We fine-tune the how-to a little bit to address more questions already default in the how-to. So that's why we're replacing it with a newer version.
Thank you. I think that's it.
Okay. Then now we're going to move actually to what you find, because now we know how to get on the platform. We have obtained access to the Fedwire Funds service MyStandards pages. So now we want to have a look at what actually can I do, what kind of treasures, because that's what they are, our resources, can I access now that I have access to that Fedwire Funds service landing page. So let's have a look. Once you're in, what you will find, and this is now the screen that you will see once you have logged in and have obtained access to our pages. This is your kind of like landing page once you're in this Fedwire Funds service landing page. You see, first of all, you see there that you will have access, which is live today. Anyone testing right now should see this. You will find our usage guidelines, and we will take you through what this means, what information you find there for the Fedwire Funds Service Release 2025. So that's one thing that you will find there. You will then find, as of March 10th, so as of coming Friday, you will find the MyStandards Readiness portals where you can start testing messages. So you see there that this group has not shared yet any portals with my son, but that will be the case as of Friday. We're wrapping it up. We're finalizing to the release of that Readiness portal. That will become available this Friday, which is exactly 2 years before our live date of March 2025. So plenty of time for you to test and get ready for that migration, single-day migration in March 2025. And you will also find news. So anything we do on the platform, we have a little publication, a little news announcement. So you see there that right now what you see there is when we made our specifications available in June 2022. But coming Friday, we will actually have a little update there that we have now opened the Readiness portals for you to start testing on a self-service basis. So that is what you see now that you log on and access our pages. Now, one thing on top there, you see this, let me go back, you see this show detail. When you click on this show detail, you're going to get some information on the Fedwire Funds Service Release 2025. And you see there that a document is available, which is the Fedwire Funds ISO 2022 Implementation Guide. And you see some information, again, on the Fedwire Funds Service. And as we clicked on that guidelines, you will see here all the guidelines that are available. Again, this is a screenshot. I will show it later in the demo. There's a lot more guidelines, obviously, than these 7, 8 showing on the screen. But here, let's first focus on as you, and that's important. So when you click on the guidelines, you have to make sure that you look for these details, because that page not necessarily opens. It depends a little bit, but this might just show closed as on the previous slide. Apologies for the flipping back, but show detail is where you will find that implementation guide. Just to make sure you find this. So as you, what is this implementation guide all about? And we did cover this in our February webinar, but this is kind of like the document that you can download and that describes the whole implementation approach and all the details of the individual implementation guidelines. So as you click the download button, you will see that you are actually able to download this document, save it on your PC, and then you can start reading and consulting that document, obviously depending on what your role in your organization is when it comes to rolling out ISO 2022 for the Fedwire Funds Service. But what you find in that document, and we covered that in the last section. I would refer to this as kind of like the business-oriented write-up of everything ISO 2022 for the Fedwire Fund service. You will have an introduction, the scope, what messages we're rolling out, what ISO messages they are, the names of these messages, the versions of these messages. You will get some general concepts on how we will be using code, how we will be using the business application header. All this now might sound as Latin to you, but in the next webinar, we will already start covering some of these concepts. But we describe them for the interested reader on a high level without going into the lowest level detail of specifications as we find them on MyStandards. So it's kind of like it bridges those with an interest. First, you could have a look at the implementation guide. Depending on what you're looking for, you might then be intrigued and want to go to the MyStandards platform to find more detail. But it's a high-level write-up of everything we will be rolling out when it comes to ISO 2022 for the Fedwire Fund service. For all the messages, obviously, you will find the scope, usage, you will find message flows, and you will find the business elements that we will be using, requiring or enabling on an optional basis. And you see here we have different chapters. How will customer credit transfers take place or be done with ISO 2022, the payment returns, the financial institution or bank transfers, drawdowns, system messages. So all this is described with message flows, pictures, and highlighting the rules and the codes that will be used. So that is the implementation guide. That's posted there, but of course today it's all about the resources, also the MyStandards platform. So we're now going to have a look at what you actually find on the platform when it comes to the implementation guidelines. So again, going to the detailed guidelines, you see always this PDF with the implementation guide there appearing for download. But now let's have a look at what you can actually access when it comes to the individual message implementation guidelines or usage guidelines. And as Gina mentioned in the introductory webinar last month, we will have 23 ISO 2022 implementation guidelines and 17 different messages, because some of the messages we implement for multiple purposes, and we will cover that in a future webinar, for example, when it comes to the account reporting, where we use one message to provide balance reports, endpoint details, totals reports. So that is why we have 23 guidelines for 17 messages. You basically will find all the implementation guidelines there for all the messages in scope of our March 10th, 2025 release that you can use for online consultation or download. And yes, we will show you how to consult online, browse the web pages, but also how you might download all the specifications that you find there for internal use within your organization. Okay, now let's have a look what MyStandards refers to, how you can consume the usage guidelines that we have made available. So going back to that same page, the guidelines, this is what we refer to as a collection. So this is the full-blown collection of all ISO 2022 implementation guidelines for release 2025 of the Fedwire Fund service. Now, for today's purposes, we're going to focus on the message that is actually the topic of our next webinar at the end of April. So let's have a look what this tool, this platform offers when you're, for example, interested in the customer credit transfer or the PAX 008 message, a name you're all familiar with if you attended the first webinar. So when you click on the customer credit transfer, this takes you to the full-blown details of this customer credit transfer PAX 008 message. What we're doing now is browsing. You can click on anything. The nice thing about this platform is that as a user of our pages, you cannot do anything wrong. You can click on anything, but you cannot do anything wrong. There's always a back button and you cannot change the specifications. That is luckily something that we as an administrator have, but you cannot change anything, or there's nothing wrong there. Just click and browse and learn how to use the platform and how to use how to learn how to interpret the specifications that we've made available there. Now, first thing I want to focus on is this, again, this show details. I'm going to say that a couple of times because myself a couple of years ago, not always use this button, and you miss out on a lot of information. So when you click on this show details, you're going to get for this specific message, part of our demo today, for this customer credit transfer message. Losing my you will find some information. So this is our 30th of June. So that is when we published our specifications version. This is for international, cross-border, and domestic purposes, high value. These are for individual transactions. And then you find some information here, like usage identifiers, that is topic of discussion for our April webinar, how you will be expected to use that. You will find the Fedwire Fund service scope, because as you remember from our first webinar, we are implementing a global standard that does it all: high value, low value, single, batch, urgent, non-urgent, instant, wholesale, and retail. But we're implementing it for the Fedwire Fund service. So we have documented how the scope of this message for Fedwire Fund service purposes. So that's some generic information about the Tax 8 message that you will find when clicking the show details. And I'm now going to click the hide details button to go back. Now, in the guideline itself, you see here, this is our Tax Year 08 message. In all its beauty, I want to show a couple of icons that are used, symbols here. Whenever there's this orange triangle, it means there's something specifically defined for the Fedwire Fund service. So again, starting from the global standard, we have reduced the functionality to meet the Fedwire Fund purpose or business needs. So whenever there's a triangle, this means that there is something to say about this specific element in the message that is defined, has been defined for Fedwire Funds purposes. Another one, that is an interesting one, is that whenever there's this forbidden sign, that means we're not allowing that element to be used for Fedwire Funds purposes. I'll just give an example: batch booking. Fedwire Fund service is an individual transaction fund transfer system, so we do not have batch booking enabled because it doesn't make sense. It's a single transaction funds transfer system. So whenever you see these red forbidden signs, that's good news, because you don't have to worry about those, because you cannot use them in the first place as you send your messages across the Fedwire Fund service. Now, for today's purposes, I'm going to be showing all these different buttons and what they mean and might offer. And I'm going to start with a really interesting one to make your life easier, and that's the hide removed element. So if I go back and forth between the slides, you see that this, the landing page, as we call it for this message, has everything, also shows everything that we don't even allow. So if you say, well, you know what, I want to focus on what Fedwire Funds requires, not what they don't allow, because I'm not supposed to use it in the first place, then you click the hide removed, and you will see that this lengthy page now, suddenly this group header, and you will learn about that in the next webinar, only actually has 4 elements, where the original page, here you see that this is probably like 10 elements, but many of those are not allowed for the Fedwire Fund service. So click on the hide removed element, and already it looks a little bit less daunting. Next, you might be interested in the XML tags. Now then, this depends on your profile and what you're after. If you're an implementer, if you need to code for all these messages, you might prefer this. These are the XML tags that they will appear in the XML schema, that is the carrier or the container for your Fedwire Funds payment instruction. But if you're more business-oriented, you actually might want to know that this is the message identification, the creation date, time, the number of transactions, and settlement information. So this reads way easier than the XML tags, where you just get this short tags as they appear in the XML messages. Now, moving back, let's focus on this group header. Now, there's many elements in the credit transfer transaction information, and we have a specific webinar, as I mentioned, obviously making some publicity for our April webinar. But just to show you, when you click on an individual element, for example, the message identification, you get the full-blown implementation detail on the right side of your screen, where we document how we want you to use this element. And you see, obviously, there are triangles, so there are notifications of how to use this for the Fedwire Funds service. And we see that there's rules. There's one rule, message identification rule, and it says that we're expecting the IMAP there. So you must populate to have a valid ISO 2022 message sent across the Fedwire Fund Service. You must populate this with the IMAT. There's synonyms because we're trying to help or to bridge you from the old world FAME, our old proprietary format that we use today, to the new ISO world. We've added the synonyms. So in our current language that we will use until March 2025, this is tag 1520, the IMAT tag. And then you will see that from a type point of view, you can get some further information there on how this is actually supposed to be used. So when I look at this type, you see that, well, what is this cross out? Just for information purposes, always the same thing. We use the global standard and make it fit for purpose for the Fedwire Fund Service. Globally, you can use message ID with up to 35 characters of whatever character set. We, however, have changed this to meet the Fedwire Funds requirements, and we're expecting you to use the IMAT. Many of you are familiar with the IMAT, but the message ID will have to carry the IMAT. If you click on this IMAT detail, then you will get the documentation of what an IMAT is and what format it has, so how you need to compose a correct IMAT. So I close this. So, sorry, I want to go one back. So all this is specifically for the message identification. You can click on creation date time, you will get the information, number of transactions. We will actually be telling you there that it has to be one. So every single element that we have enabled, because remember, we're not showing what not has been enabled, comes with this full-blown information. Now again, to avoid this is too overwhelming, you can also say, well, you know what, let me close this again. It's nice to see all this detail, but let me just show me the result. I don't want to know what ISO was 35 and what Fedwire Funds now wants it to be. I want the result view. So just show me what it comes down to. And now we see that the message identification, you don't see this strike through anymore of 35 characters. You see, well, this is the IMAT, and the format is the IMAT format. You don't no longer see what it was in the global ISO standard and what we're expecting it to be. So there's a couple of features of the tool. You can hide elements that you do not want to see or that are not allowed by the Fedwire Fund Service better. You can show the XML tags. You can click on every single element, but you could also say, just show me what it comes down to when it is for the Fedwire Fund Service. I don't want to see anything that has been removed, or I don't want to see anything as it is available on the global level. I just want to see what the Fedwire Fund is expecting me to do for this specific message. So all this is available for every single message in our portfolio. Now, this is the browse functionality. So you're on a web page, and you're reading, clicking, and learning things, but you might want to or prefer to have something in your hands, and that is where the export functionality comes into play. So I'm back in my customer credit transfer PAX 8 message, but you see now on the right side of the screen that if you want to use this guidance or have this guidance somewhere else than on a web page of MyStandards, you can export it as a PDF, as an Excel, or actually as what we refer to an XML or an XML schema. Now, regular slides. What if you download the PDF? You will get the document for download as shown on the left side, and you have two flavors that you can pick up. The plain version contains everything. How the global standard has been reduced, and hopefully you recognize the same symbols there, what is forbidden for the Fedwire Fund Service, what has guidance for use across the Fedwire Fund Service. But the plain version is a couple of hundred pages because this contains every single element, every single definition format. So that is everything there is to that message, showing how to use it for the Fedwire Fund Service. I personally prefer the compact version because that will not show me everything that I'm not allowed to use in the first place. That will kind of be a nice summary of, hey, for the Fedwire Fund Service, this is how you use the customer credit transfer PAX 8 message. Now, PDF is what it is. It depends a little bit on what you're looking for, but as mentioned, you're looking at a big document for each implementation guideline. So the second option that you might prefer is to download the Excel version of the Fedwire Fund Service Implementation Guideline. Again, always of this customer credit transfer PAX8 message. So this offers two flavors too, but within one Excel sheet. But you see, it's a lot easier to, at least from my point of view, compared to a PDF. I find this a lot easier to digest, to work with. You find the light view, and in the light view, you see here what you get from an information point of view. You get the level, and that's just where it appears in the message. You get the message, the element name, full blown. You get the XML tag, as we showed. It's important, let me just focus, stress this, that everything we've seen on the web page is used to generate this content. So there is no mapping or manipulation. What you see on the web page can be translated into a PDF, plain or compact, can be translated in an Excel sheet, or can be exported in an XML schema, as we will see later on. But it is important that everything starts from the single source, the way we have published our implementation guidelines on the MyStandards pages. So here you see whether the element is required, and you will learn all about that, how we identify that in the future webinars, what codes may be used, whether there's any Fedwire funds restrictions in that table, and then additional details where you will find Fedwire specific details. And actually, we showed that as an example, that message identification. You will see here that the rule 1, if you click on it, you're going to be brought to the rule that says that this must be an IMET. You will see the synonym as I showed it, and you will see that this type has changed to the Fedwire Funds IMET. On the bottom, you can also use the full view, and that provides the full-blown detail. For all these elements, you will get the definitions. You will get all the rules. It's a little bit bigger to work with. What I tend to do is that I tend to work with the light view, and if I want more detail, clicking on any of these elements takes you to the full blue view, where you can find the documentation and ISO documentation with definitions and more detail than you find here in the light view version of that Excel spreadsheet. Finally, if this is what you do or what you're supposed to do within your organization, you can also download the XML schema representing the Fedwire Funds Implementation Guideline in the most formal way. So this is where you can download the XSD that you can use then to start creating your samples. And this is, for example, a sample message of an ISO 2022 message. So let's see whether we received questions, Leslie, and if not, then I would quickly go to MyStandards and see whether we can do this live. Just show you that it really exists and it's not just slideware. But first, Leslie, did we get any questions?
We sure did. So here's the first one. I do not seem to have access to the document you reviewed, the implementation guide.
Okay, so thank you to whoever asked this question, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you live. It's there. So I'm now live on the MyStandards page. You see, I'm going to the Fedwire Fund Service. I'm going to the guidelines, and you should see here, so show details. This is your Fedwire Fund Service Implementation Guide. I'm going to just show you. When you click on it, you're going to see it downloading this, and then you will find it in your download folder. So you should see the implementation guide. Just make sure that I want to focus on this one, because that is something that goes wrong. Oh, let me use this. If you look for Fedwire, you go to the Federal Reserve. There's nothing here to download. Federal Reserve Financial Services. You need to first go to the Fedwire Fund Service, then the usage guidelines, and there you find that document for downloading.
Thank you for the demo. The next question, what should I export? A PDF, Excel, or the schema version?
It depends on your role. I personally would only download the PDF if you have difficulties getting to sleep at night. I think it's a very lengthy read. I would focus, if you want to see the features and the functionality of what will be possible when sending payments across the Fedwire Fund service, I would focus on the Excel because the light view and the full view allows you to actually also access the documentation, but you can say, show me only everything that Fedwire Funds is enabling. You can read what these elements mean, how they can be used, what codes are available for them, but you have it all in a compact way. And if you want more detail, there's always the full view. The PDF, it is kind of like not as user-friendly, I would say, as the Excel spreadsheet. Now, if you're coding, or for example, if you will be the one showing your readiness to us, and then showing attesting your readiness portal testing, then you might just be interested in downloading the schema and creating your message instances, your samples, and uploading them to prove us that you're ready to go to the next phase that we will cover later on. So it depends a little bit what your background is and what your responsibility is within the organization.
Thank you. Do I need to export all the guidelines individually that you're showing on the screen?
No, and I can reuse this because here you can see if I go in this customer credit transfer message, I can export it and it's an individual message. So I will export the PAX 008. However, if I go to the usage guidelines, I can actually select everything and then go here, and I will show this in the webinar as we go through the individual messages more and more. And you can actually here say, export my selection. So create the PDFs for all the messages. And then, you know what, I'm not interested in this one. You can tick it off and say, just, you select whatever you want, and you say, export PDFs, export Excel, or export the schema. So you don't have to do it individually, but you may. You can also download the whole collection in one go. So up to you on how you want to proceed, depending on your interest and what you're after.
That's a nice feature. Thank you. Will you publish any technical specs? For example, the technical envelope information for ISO messages?
Yes, we will make those available, but as you progress with the learning and with your ISO projects, we do so too. So these documents will become available and published on MyStandards as we finalize them and consider them ready for publication. So yes, we will be publishing more and more documentation on this section where you now find the implementation guide. In the future, you will find more documentation as it becomes available.
Thank you. Will you also publish your expected service levels? For example, the time you think it will take a Fedwire sender to send a PAX 8 and receive a PAX 2.
I would think that we probably would publish that more on our implementation center than on the MyStandards. I think that is more kind of like service features from the Fedwire funds, not necessarily linked to individual messages. So I think those are more fit for publication in our ISO 2022 Fedwire funds ISO 2022 implementation center. Again, we will share that at the end where you find all that information.
Thank you. Will mapping specs be provided between legacy FAME format and ISO?
We will train and work with you as much as possible. We have the synonyms for those of you getting ready for the Swift migration starting in March of this year. So in the 20th, in less than 2 weeks time. You know that we have provided mapping tables there, how to map ISO into Fedwire funds messages as they are sent in the cross-border space. So we do think that there is already a lot of material available that shows how the new standard relates to the old standard in an implementation guide that we will be updating with the release of our Readiness portal this Friday. We will share also the table that Gina presented, how all these different ISO messages relate to current Fedwire Fund FAME messages with codes and subcodes, subtype codes. But real one-on-one mapping tables is not part of our, let's say, work effort scheduled today, the individual message mappings. But as mentioned, we do provide some guidance already today as we only migrate in March 2025, how to accommodate for ISO data in same formats between March 20 and March 10th, 2025.
Okay, we have one last one. Are we going to update the usage guidelines that are posted since June 2022?
Yes, we will. Now, you will always be informed when we do this. And actually, I'm going to say that this Friday, as we enable or open the Readiness portals, we will provide an update of our implementation specs. But we need to say, and we need to recognize that as we code, as we test, as you test, that we will find things, that we learn things that will cause for tweaking of our implementation guidelines. I'll just take one example. Many of you might have heard of the CPMI guidance on harmonizing the role of ISO 2022 for cross-border payments. As you know, many of our payments find their origin in the cross-border space or go into the cross-border space. As we assess those requirements, we might find the need to update some of our guidance because the international best practice is evolving. But you will always have plenty of notice, and of course, there will be coming a point in time where we freeze them. But this Friday, actually, we will be pushing an update. It's a tiny update to our specifications, and the implementation guide next version will document in the change history what changes we have made. But yes, you should expect changes to the guidelines in the coming months.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it.
Okay, then I'm going to go back to the slides to now show you something about the Readiness portal. In the meantime, do let your send in your questions. If we have time towards the end, definitely happy to demo live some of the features that I've shown in Fedwire. But let's first get through the remaining material for today. Now, the MyStandards Readiness portal. That I cannot show live yet because it hasn't been enabled, and definitely not to my son. We're working on it internally, so he has no access to that yet. So that will be a Fedwire. Now, what is the MyStandards Readiness portal? So this is built on top of the MyStandards platform, and the great benefit is that all the testing starts directly from the implementation guidelines as we have captured them on the MyStandards platform. So again, there is no copy pasting or manipulating. The testing of messages that you upload is directly done against the implementation guidelines published on the website that you have downloaded from the website. But this is the web-based application on top of MyStandards. It is available or will be available this Friday for all ISO 2022 messages in scope of the 2025 release, ISO 2022 release for the Fedwire Fund service. You have access, as we will show, to test use cases and sample messages. And this is something that we're working on, and we will make those available in preparation for the different webinars that have been scheduled. And then importantly, this is on a self-serve basis. You can test 24/7, 365. So you can come in whenever you want by reusing your MyStandards credentials. So this is stressing the importance of getting those credentials. You reuse exactly the same login, and you can come in anytime. Any day to test your message samples against the Fedwire Fund Service implementation guidelines. Now, we do want to share what the MyStandards Readiness portal does and what it does not do. So I'm going to take you through the features and kind of like balance it a little bit where to kind of like set the expectations of what this platform will do. First of all, and that's really important, this provides point-to-point testing, what we refer to as static testing. You upload the PAX 8 and the tool, I will show you later on, will tell you, hey, you did a great job, or you made mistakes, and these are the mistakes, and that is why it is wrong. But you upload a message and get the test result. This is not dynamic testing where you upload your PAX 8 message, your payment, and you would get, for example, the acknowledgement, or it would show you the advice as sent on the other side of the transaction. So that is dynamic testing. That is not what this portal does. This portal allows you to upload all the messages and test them against the guidelines, but it does not provide the answer to what you upload. It just validates whether it's correct. It validates messages uploaded by users. It provides sample messages that you can edit and then save as yours in the portal. It does not create test messages. So you will find there tens of test messages that we have created, but the tool, you cannot say like, okay, make me or build me 100 PAX 8 messages. The PAX 8 messages that you will find there have been created by Fedwire, the Fedwire team. You must create your own messages, but you can copy paste or you can edit existing samples and then save them as yours. But the tool does not create messages. It checks compliance with of your test messages with the global ISO standard and the Fedwire front service implementation guidelines. So all the customizations that we have done. So it is the technical validation that is performed. It does not check compliance with any Fedwire front service business validations. For example, the tool will require a routing number to be 9 digits. The tool does not know, because this is a platform offered by Swift, the tool does not know whether that routing number is actually a Fedwire participant. So that kind of data, is the routing number correct? Is an IMAT unique, for example? That's not kind of like what MyStandards will test. It will test the format of an IMAT, but not the uniqueness of an IMAT. That is what you will be testing when you come into the DIT2 environment and test with the Fedwire front service application. It is also not allow you to test the technical header. So coming back to the question asked previously, we will make specs available, but the technical Fedwire front header is not an ISO message, and MyStandards Readiness portal allows you to test ISO 2022 messages. So that will be part of the testing in this environment. It shows you the test results, and it points out the errors, and it links you to the documentation to better understand your error. And it allows you to online correct and test and test and test and revalidate again until you get it right. So that is something that the tool offers, but it would not provide the Fedwire front service error codes. So that will be published, will be made available, but it will not point to the error codes that are specific for the Fedwire front service, the more business validation error codes. And then finally, it provides access to the test history, who has done what and what the outcome was, and whether they fixed it and whether they tested it again until they got it right. One little note, and I'll show that later in the presentation, is that while the tool does not allow to provide or to test end-to-end, meaning that the dynamic query response, we will make available test use cases that reflect end-to-end test cases, but these are for you to assess and analyze. The tool itself does not. That we make samples available to show an end-to-end PAX 8, for example. You send the message. If you make a mistake, what the PAX 2 rejection would be, what the acknowledgement would be, what the advice would be, that will be provided by us, not by the tool. So just a small clarification, while the tool does not offer dynamic testing, we will make dynamic end-to-end samples available for you to use within your system. So that's kind of like the features and what the MyStandards Readiness portal offers and why we have chosen the tool. It also will come with a MyStandards Readiness Portal guide, and you see a similar slide than the one that I used for the implementation guide. What we've done is it's the same purpose. It's kind of like, I mean, the same content. It explains, introduces the Readiness Portal features, what you can do, what resources might help, some general concepts around testing, and then what is important is that all these chapters then are aligned. So in the implementation guideline, where you can find the write-up of everything about customer credit transfers, then the test cases and the use cases and the test samples are actually documented in Chapter 3 of the Readiness Portal guide. So you learn in the implementation guide, Chapter 3, and as you are ready to start testing, then you move to Chapter 3 in the Readiness Portal guide, and you start seeing how it all works and what it looks like as you create real messages. So for ease of use, we have aligned these chapters, and for all the webinars that we have scheduled for the coming months, that will be our approach. We will focus on the content, the business content of these messages in the webinar based on the ISO 2022 implementation guide, and then we will show you some of the use case and the scenarios as we have described them in the Readiness Portal guide, the same chapter. Again, this will be available as of Friday on the MyStandards Readiness Portal. Do not look for it now because we need 2 more days to clean it all up and make it ready for publication. Now, the Readiness Portal itself, where do you find this? You find this on that same landing page. So we have been focusing on the usage guidelines here. We're a member of this community, but you see here on the right side, as of March, you will find here all the Readiness Portal that we are making available. And what are we making available? So if we click on this, you will find an account reporting webinar. It orders them alphabetically, so that is not in line with the chapters. Maybe we should add numbers there. But you will find what we're going to be our first focus, the customer credit transfers. You see there that that portal will allow you to test the Chapter 3 messages, the customer credit transfer, the payment status report, the payment status request, and the BA, the business application header for each message. The drawdowns, that will allow you to test the Chapter 6 messages, the financial institution, the Chapter 5 messages. So for each chapter in the implementation guide and in the Readiness Portal guide, you will find one portal where you can start testing. Now, let's say that in light of our next webinar being at the customer credit transfers, you're interested in the customer credit transfers, you click on that portal, and this is the screen you will get. So the messages that are described previously there and that little write-up are the messages that here you can now start testing again. So you can test your business application header, which is a message that accompanies every other ISO 2022 message. You can test your customer credit transfer. You can test what the Fedwire funds payment status message will look like for consumption in your organization. And you can test how you can request a status update from the Fedwire funds service. So the 4 messages described in Chapter 3 of the implementation guideline can be tested in this customer credit transfer readiness portal. Now, for today, we're focusing on one message, the customer credit transfer PAX 8 message. And what we see here is that there are samples. Now, again, it hasn't been enabled yet, but there are samples made available. You don't see them yet, but for each message, you will find sample messages. And you see here that there's a customer credit transfer scenario 1, step 1, PAX 8. And these are all PAX 8 messages that you can download, you can consult, you can check whether you understand them or how we have created them. But what's the purpose of these messages is that we have linked these to the implementation guide and the Readiness Portal guide for you to better understand how an ISO 2022 message, in this case, PAX 8 message, works. So let me explain that. But again, today is setting you up for success in the future webinars. This all will become very clear as we dive into the individual message details during the future webinars. But in the Readiness Portal guide, you're going to find in Chapter 3 the customer credit transfer use cases. So we have made up samples where Corporation A, as you see here on screen, instructs its financial institution, Bank A, to pay, and so on and so forth. Now, how do we link all that to this? By the naming convention. So as you read in the Readiness Portal guide these descriptions, you will see that the naming of these samples is very easy to follow, because first of all, the first part of the name is going to be the portal. So you see, as we write all these samples, the first part is the customer credit transfer. That is where you find this message for reuse, for understanding, for testing, but you find it in the customer credit transfer portal. Then we add the scenario. So the first scenario that is described is a happy path, all goes well. That is the second part of the naming of the sample. This is the customer credit transfer scenario 1, which takes you to this guide, happy path. The third step is, the third part of the name is the step. So you see a graphic where you say step 1, this bank, Fedwire sender, sends the customer credit transfer. So you see step 1, and you see in the name, it is customer credit transfer, scenario 1, happy path, the first message sent in step 1. And then the last is the ISO message that you can consult there. So always the same principle for all these samples. I've just added for completeness a negative scenario. So scenario 3 is a rejection by the Fedwire Fund Service for failing business validation reasons. Again, you will see this is part of the customer credit transfer portal. It is scenario 3. Step 2, PAX 2. So step 2 is where the Fedwire Fund Service rejects the incoming PAX 8 and sends the negative acknowledgement to the Fedwire sender, the rejection. So always the same, and I do apologize for the flipping. That's the problem with build-ups. But as you will see as of Friday, all these, for all the different messages across all the different portals, follow that same naming convention. Customer credit transfer, scenario 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 variations, where you use structured remittance information, related remittance information. All that naming convention as described in the guide will be replicated in the sample messages as they are made available on the Readiness portal. I hope you will appreciate that. It makes it easier to understand how each individual scenario that we describe in the guide, how you find these messages actually on the Readiness portal as it becomes available this Friday. Okay, now you're interested in testing. So going back to that customer credit transfer portal, now we want to test. Now, how do you test? Well, when you click the test button, you get a couple of options. You can upload a message yourself from your PC. You can upload a test message. You can upload a zip. You could upload multiple messages to test them all in one go and get the results. Or you can copy paste your message here. So these are 3 ways of testing. As you create your samples internally, as you prepare your systems, test your systems, build your systems, want to test your systems, you create sample messages that your system creates, and then you can upload them in the tool to see whether they would pass the technical validation of the Fedwire Fund service. Now, as you upload a message, positive. You upload a message and it's valid. Now, as you upload that message, everything will turn green, and basically you pass the test. Your customer credit transfer is valid message. I was almost going to say this is the less interesting one, although it is really great news that what you created is actually meeting the Fedwire Fund's implementation guidance. But from what the tool offers point of view, I think the negative use case where you make mistakes is the more interesting one. If you upload a message and it doesn't pass the Fedwire Fund service validation, technical validations, it doesn't meet our schema requirements, it doesn't meet our technical rules, then this will be picked up by the Readiness portal. And it will tell you in the summary that there's 2 errors. And you can click on each error to find out what the mistake is. So if I click on what is wrong with this, the tool will basically tell me that, well, FDN is not valid. It must be one of the following values. It must be FDW. What I've done here is that FDN is the code for FedNow. Now we're testing Fedwire. So FDW is the Fedwire identifying the Fedwire system where this code is not recognized for Fedwire Funds purposes. So whenever you make a mistake, it's going to tell you what is wrong. And it's also going to allow you to access the documentation. So you can directly be brought to the implementation guide where it shows you what mistake you made. And there you will see that the only acceptable value is Fedwire, which identifies the Fedwire Funds service for a message sent across Fedwire, obviously. So that is where I think the value and the strength of the tool is, that every single mistake you make, it will tell you what is wrong. And if you need to better understand why, then it takes you to the documentation. And then the other feature, which is extremely interesting, but should only be used if really the documentation isn't clear enough, is where you can escalate this to support. So if you make mistakes, you check the documentation, you try and try, and for whatever reason you keep getting error for something that you obviously think is correct, you can escalate it to support, and then any of the funds team will get a message where you tell us that you've tried and you do not understand what's wrong with your instance. The nice thing from our point of view is that this will take us specifically to your sample, specifically to the element where you made the mistake. So this is not you sending us an email, tested this message and this went wrong. This feature will allow us to dive directly into the point where you make a mistake against your specifications, so uniquely identify what is wrong with your message, and then we can assist you with support. So all this available as of this coming Friday. Now, history is the last feature I'm gonna show you. And this is where, when you click on history, where you can see everyone that has been testing and how they did. So here, always my son as the guinea pig here, uploaded some messages, and some credit transfers were valid, some mistakes were made, 3 errors, 1 error, and then eventually it became valid. So you can see a history of everything that you have done, everything that you have tested. You can access these messages, you can see and assess the mistakes that were made, and especially coming back to the question, can we reuse our logon credentials for the team? This could be really powerful, because as you take over from your colleague and in testing, you can actually see what happened, what kind of mistakes were made by the tool that generates your messages, how they were fixed, and so on. So you can find the full-blown history in here of who has been testing what. And then finally, the feature is the coverage tree. And that will be important the further you get into your testing and onboarding with these messages, because this will allow you to assess what features you have tested. So this will show you that all these messages, all these elements, you have so many use cases where you use this element, where you use this element. You've never used, or you've never tested, for example, against this element. So that will give you kind of like an idea of, okay, I've done my testing, but have I tested enough? Have I covered everything that the Fedwire fund is expecting? Because if you never use an element where we have set specific rules, you might want to give it a try. Of course, if your client base doesn't trigger that kind of information, maybe not, but you might want to have a look of all the things you didn't test and whether they could be generated depending on the client you're serving or you're offering wires to. So the coverage tree will give you an overview of what you have tested against, and especially maybe what you haven't tested at all as of yet. And with that, Leslie, I think it's time for questions again.
Yep, we do have some. Can everyone see what I am doing in the portal?
No. So it depends. Always the question, can we reuse the credentials? If you reuse the credentials, obviously yes. But otherwise, nobody sees what you're doing in the portal, with the exception, obviously, of us as an administrator. Because if you escalate support questions, then we obviously can dive into your sample. But nobody, we have set this is a parameter that can be set at will, but we have set it to that nobody sees any other test activity of any other MyStandards user. So it's fully private from that point of view.
Thank you. Why is the Fed giving MyStandards Readiness portal for ISO testing if the banks have Fedline direct connection?
Could you repeat that, Leslie? Why are
we providing MyStandards Readiness portal for ISO testing if banks have Fedline direct connection?
Okay, I mean, we provide this as the first way of starting to get ready for the Fedwire funds migration to ISO 2022. This is, we consider MyStandards as a standalone tool where you can check all the the technical specifications and guidelines of the Fedwire Fund Service and get as many mistakes out of your systems and the way you generate payment before you actually come into the DIT2 environment for testing with the Fed or with a peer bank. So we see this MyStandards as a tool to precede DIT2 testing, to get your messages, I'm going to say your messages cleaned up, to make sure you get all the technical aspects of the specifications right before you actually come into DIT2 testing.
Thank you. Do you offer support beyond the tutorials?
We will show, I just showed that if you make mistakes and you can't figure it out, even going back to the documentation and getting the error messages there, there is that escalate to support. We will, as part of our webinars, we will be training you on how to use the Readiness portal for the different messages in scope of our implementation. So it will be training on an ongoing basis as we open the Readiness portal, provide samples, and then have every month a webinar focusing on one specific flow, customer credit transfer, bank transfers, drawdowns, and so forth. So yes, we will be offering or helping you over the next coming months with the webinars and further support on top of the tutorials that show you really well on how to make most of the tool. We will complement that with how to use the tool from a Fedwire Funds point of view.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Okay, so last but not least, MyStandards Readiness Portal Test Script and Attestation. And in the February webinar, Gina covered the different testing environments that we are establishing, coming back also a little bit maybe to the question just raised now, why the Readiness Portal versus DIT2. So we are establishing different testing environments with different requirements and for each of these, we will be environments, we will be setting requirements and test scripts. So to support the Fedwire Fund Service migration to ISO 2022 messaging standards, which is a big project and a big migration, we will be enabling these various ways and serial almost of testing. Now, this will be done for the MyStandards Readiness Portal, it will be done for the DIT2 environment, and for the Saturday production testing all the way up into January, February 2025 as per Gina's timeline. Gina also covered the groups that will be required to test and how they will test and when they will be required to test. And that was all covered in the webinar. I just want to have a picture here that if you missed that first session in our educational series, that the good news is that in the meantime, that recorded session has been made available on our implementation center, ISO 2022 Implementation Center. For today, we wanted to give you a heads up that when it comes to the MyStandards Readiness Portal, that those test scripts and attestation forms will be made available on Friday. Everything comes on Friday when we open the Readiness Portal, including the form that will allow you to attest that you have done or you have you have completed your Readiness Portal testing. So you will find there as of Friday the 10th, the Readiness Portal test scripts. So mentioned that is the requirements we're setting on certain Fedwire Funds participants, service providers, and software vendors to successfully complete testing in the MyStandards Readiness Portal. So this is your guide, and there are different test scripts. There's two sections, so make sure you get the right one. There is the section for the Fedline Direct users, and then there's the section for the Fedline Advantage import test script. So make sure as you assess that document and you start preparing that you test in line with what is requested, depending on how you connect and participate in the Fedwire Funds service. Mandatory testing groups must complete this test script before they can move into the DIT2 environment. Now, we do not expect anyone to start testing on Friday, although we might be surprised, but at this time, we only want to make sure or encourage you that you understand what the requirements will be, what kind of messages we will be expecting you to test, where to find them in the Readiness Portal, and it will just, we want to get you going. While we're opening it this Friday, we do recognize that not everyone coming Monday will be in there to start testing and certify that they're meeting the Readiness Portal test requirements. Now, you will also find there the testing attestation form, and we designed one form that you will submit multiple times. So first, you will submit that form when you have wrapped up your Readiness Portal testing to inform us that your organization successfully completed the Readiness Portal testing requirements. And then in the second phase, as you move into the DIT2 testing, you will be reusing that same form to update us that not only have you now completed the readiness testing requirement, but you've also met the DIT2 testing, and that you test that your organization has ticked off let's say the two boxes there. So all completed forms will be submitted to the mailbox that we will show in our wrap-up slide. You will have to provide some organization information in the testing attestation form, and it will have to be signed by an executive or an authorized person in a senior management official to testify that you have done the Readiness Portal and or DIT2 testing and certify of meeting the requirements that we are setting. Always, as we said, different scripts for different users depending on the way you connect. Whether you're Fedline Direct or a Fedline Advantage user. So this is kind of like a heads up that these two documents will be made available on MyStandards coming Friday. But again, there is no urgency as of now for you to start testing and complete. That will be covered in due time. But they will be made available so you can at least understand what the requirements will be for the MyStandards Readiness Portal testing. And with that, we've reached the end of the webinar. I think we have 5 minutes left, Leslie, for any further questions that might have come in the meantime.
Yeah, maybe we'll just do one in the interest of time. Who can we contact if we have questions regarding the Readiness Portal test script?
So in general, for the test scripts, we would suggest that you either send or contact us through the email address on the next slide, the wrap-up slide, or if you want, we have the office hours that have been scheduled, and you can find the dates there on our implementation center where you can come with your questions to be asked live to the Fedwire Funds business team. So either, depending on what kind of questions and when the next office hours has been scheduled, you might send us an email with your questions, or you could keep your questions for the in-person virtual webinars where we take questions from the audience live. Any other questions, Leslie, or should we?
I think in the interest of time, should we wrap up?
Okay.
Thank
Good.
you.
Wrap up. So wrap up is short and sweet. First of all, I've mentioned it a couple of times. If you have more questions after today's session, there you can see the address fedwire.funds.format@ny.frb.org. That's where you can send all questions related to the ISO 2022 implementation by the Fedwire Fund service. And then it's time for me to hand out your homework. First of all, register for the customer credit transfer webinar that has been scheduled for April 26th at 2 p.m., same time as today, Eastern time. And I really want to stress kind of like that you will make most of that webinar if you do find time to read Chapter 3. Have a look at Chapter 3. It's an easy read because the focus is on the business aspect of that message. But have a look at Chapter 3 of the implementation guide and the Readiness Portal guide that describes the use cases. If you have time and interest, browse on MyStandards after you get those credentials in place and look at the implementation guidelines. But we're convinced that you will make most of the individual chapter webinars if you come prepared and you find some time to read up on the material that we have made available ahead of that customer credit transfer webinar at the end of April. With that, The only thing to do is to thank you for attending today's webinar. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you feel better prepared to start rolling out or preparing for the rollout of ISO 2022 as a Fedwire fund service participant or service provider. As always, as Leslie, Gina, mentioned, this session has been recorded and will be made available on our implementation center. All questions that you may have raised during this session that have not been addressed will be added to an FAQ on that same implementation center. And finally, I hope to welcome you for the customer credit transfer webinar, which, don't want to scare you, will be the first deep dive into the ISO 2022 message specifications. So thank you for attending today again, and have a nice rest of the day. Bye-bye.